Good morning. I thought I'd give you a different view of my eccentric room and its eccentric walls. This Peter and April. This was an interesting project, and the cover is also interesting. If you'd like to switch back and have a little look, because the cover is indeed my mother and father. In the 1930s, and it might be of interest to you that the cover is of my mother throughout the entire series of her different stages of her life, and it might be opportune now to state that the whole series is based upon my family. And many of the stories, I say based, I mean, she didn't go to prison. And and she didn't have sisters. But there are many anecdotes in the series that are based upon fact. But the pictures on the front of the Miriam books is my mother. And the picture of the front of Peter and April is my parents in their 30s, I think it was, disembarking off some ship. Anyway, it was an interesting book to write, and they did actually live in Barkingside and Clay Hall, and that's where I was raised when I was about a nipper. Yes, when I was a nipper. Enough of that. And it's an enjoyable book to write. As I keep saying, there is one more, because this book is about Peter, which is Marilyn's son. And I'm almost about halfway through Mary's story now. It's taken a bit of a time because I am decorating at the same time. This, by the way, is a family tree of the entire 150 people that I'm getting together at some point in time, doing it all at the same time. But I'm rambling now. I'm rambling. 3 minutes. Too much talk. Here we go. And people have also got back to me saying that they're not too keen on the American AI voices. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not too keen on either, because this is an EastEnder story. But what can I do? The program is American, so it's an American AI voices. You just have to live with it. I'm hoping that the program will eventually give us a choices of voices. I like that. But for the time being, you have to imagine they're EastEnders. Here we go.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are pulling back the lens a little from our usual focus. We're zeroing in on a couple that has really anchored the stability of the entire extended Miriam series universe. And if you've been following this narrative for a long time, and we know so many of you have, possibly through what is now the 10th book in this incredible saga, you really understand the immense sort of quiet weight carried by Peter and April Baxter.
That is absolutely the right way to frame it. This deep dive is, well, it's custom tailored for you, the devoted reader, because we are moving beyond that familiar matriarchal center to really explore the foundational drama of Peter and April.
Right.
We're going to be tracking their journey across a really pivotal quarter century. We're starting with their post-war wedding in 1946, going through their lives in Barkingside and Eastbourne.
Which were two very different lives.
Oh, hugely. And confronting intense grief, seismic societal shifts, and some just staggering personal secrets right up to that terrifying moment of April's surgery in 1970.
And what a monumental journey is this.
Yeah.
Our mission today isn't just to, chronologically list 25 years of their lives. We're here to unpack something, I think, much deeper and more universal about that era. How do two individuals, and especially Peter and April, whose backgrounds are so drastically different and frankly marked by profound trauma, how do they manage to construct a seemingly stable, respectable life. How do they define their version of normalcy?
Right.
When that foundation is constantly being undercut by tragedy, by denial, and by these carefully guarded lies, it's a study in resilience, but it's a resilience built on silence.
It's the quintessential story of the silent generation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They endured events that, if they happened today, would demand intensive public processing, therapy, the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Instead, they folded them into the fabric of their marriage. So, let's start where their stability began, in the immediate, slightly battered aftermath of the Second World War.
Okay, let's unpack this moment in time. 1946. We have Peter, who is 40, and April, who is 41, and they're finally getting married and heading to Eastbourne.
Oh, yeah.
It's important to note their age here. Marrying at 40 and 41 in post-war Britain, it suggests a lifetime of searching, of being blocked by circumstances, and now this urgent, almost desperate need for stability and for domesticity.
Precisely. And they're taking the train down from London, traveling second class, which, it signals their cautious, maybe newly affluent, but still very restricted status.
Yeah.
The sources paint this incredible contrast. You have the personal bliss of the honeymoon, and it's set against the very real physical scars of the recent conflict.
They arrive in Eastbourne and they find their bed and breakfast on Seaside Road.
Mm-hmm.
That detail is so powerful. They're in a resort town. It's supposed to be picturesque, but Peter immediately notices the lingering damage.
Right.
He reflects that the attractive travel agent photos he'd seen back in Stratford, they must have been pre-war images, because he realizes the entire South Coast had suffered a pasting. The war hadn't just ended. It was physically still present in the broken facades and the patched-up buildings.
And that contrast continues inside, doesn't it? The first thing they have to do is hand over their Lashon books to the landlady, Mrs. James.
Such a grounding detail.
It's a sharp reminder that this escape isn't total. The economic strictures of post-war Britain still govern their lives, right down to their meals. Yet, despite all of that, they carve out these moments of classic romance.
Mm-hmm.
They're eating oysters, enjoying the view from their sea-facing room, watching men on a small jetty building a replica wooden boat. And that little boat, it sort of symbolizes the effort to rebuild something beautiful, doesn't it?
It really does. And that early experience, it immediately defines Eastbourne for them, particularly for April. It becomes their shared vision of a sanctuary. Yeah. April initially wishes they'd married in the summer, but the landlady points out that actually the area is already packed with visitors. It shows this hunger for normality after years of war. This experience really cements Eastbourne in their minds as the ideal place.
The goal.
Exactly. The goal for a mortgage-free house and a clean, safe place to raise the family they hope to build.
And we absolutely have to pause here and reflect on why April needed that sanctuary so desperately. Her life before Peter was, it was characterized by utter impoverishment and what the source starkly calls filth.
Leslie Helly, her father, he worked in sanitation near the Thames. And we're not talking about modern sewage systems.
No.
The source is explicit. He cleaned open sewers. He would come home covered in what looked like thick, dark brown mud, clinging to his worn boots and overalls. You can't overstate the social and physical implications of that job in 1930s London.
No.
It speaks to a level of poverty and physical degradation that defined April's earliest memories.
And the family history is just laced with disaster. Leslie's first wife, Janelle, who was April's biological mother, she died of cholera during the sixth pandemic, a disease that was linked to her merchant sailor brother who was working the London docks.
So cholera in that context is almost a metaphor for the literal toxicity surrounding her entire life.
It is. Leslie then remarried Maisie, who worked as a busty barmaid pulling pints at the Bell and Anchor.
But the real shattering trauma that arrived in 1940, April was only 9 years old when both Leslie and Maisie were killed outright in a bus accident.
It's just gone.
The shock of that sudden, total absence must have been debilitating for a child.
And immediately she was plunged into the care of her maternal grandmother, Mrs. First, who is, universally and consistently described in the sources as a noxious and foul-mouthed harridan.
Not a glowing review.
Not at all. And Mrs. First ran this tiny, squalid boarding house in Manor Park.
And here's where the narrative turns profoundly dark. The source material explains that Mrs. First's tenants were all men, and they did not always treat April as the child she was. This forced April to learn, far too early in life, what wicked desires men possessed, and of the excessive things of which they were capable. You can see this is the absolute core of April's psychological makeup.
Yeah.
This pervasive early exposure to filth and danger that she spends the rest of her life trying to scrub clean.
Which is why Peter's arrival is so incredibly symbolic. He wasn't some hero saving her from a fire. He was a young, solid body, a domestic competence who arrived to fix a faulty electric cooker.
A white knight fixing the broken domesticity.
Exactly. April explicitly contrasts his youthful and solid body and his gentle nature with the decades of degradation she had endured. He offered safety. He offered wholesomeness. He was a soothing balm to her shattered spirit.
That really establishes the dynamic of their marriage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just love. It's a mutual pact for domestic stability and emotional cleansing.
Mm-hmm.
So they return from Eastbourne to Barkingside, moving into Peter's old bedroom at number 8 White Road, which is Miriam and Roy's house.
Right, the family home.
It's supposed to be temporary while they save for their own flat. But the immediate reality of their passion clashes, well, violently with Miriam's suburban propriety.
The passion was loud. Number 8 was a sturdy terraced house, but the sounds coming from Peter and April's room during their guile, their passionate lovemaking, were simply too much for Miriam and Roy.
Miriam was mortified, just absolutely terrified, that the neighbors, the highly judgmental neighbors of suburban Barkingside, would hear and assume it was her and Roy making the racket.
And Roy, the stoic post-war husband, was biting his pillow, trying not to laugh, but also equally unable to sleep. And Miriam is demanding action, worried about what sort of child she had brought into the world.
Right.
But Roy, being Roy, the quiet problem solver, he eventually handled it. The source mentions a secret appointment a week later. It's unspecified, which adds to the mystery and the humor, but it was clearly effective.
The racket stops.
The racket stops. And this detail, it just beautifully illustrates the tension. April and Peter bringing their East End passion and their urgent need for emotional connection into this highly controlled, conservative, suburban environment.
And the lengths the family had to go to maintain that facade of quiet respectability.
Exactly. And as they settle, April begins that slow process of integration. She meets Judy at the record shop, who becomes her essential first friend in Barkingside. Judy introduces April to the local customs, the big Ilford stores, and she helps draw her out of the isolation and the shadow of Manor Park.
Judy is the first piece of April's new, stable social puzzle.
By the early 1950s, April takes a temporary job at the local library, which is this tiny, rundown place next to Holy Trinity Church, managed by the very prim Miss Knock. This is happening just as she becomes pregnant in 1953.
That setting is crucial. The old library was musty, it was filled with dead flies, and the path outside was choked with weeds. It was familiar, a bit decaying, but comfortable for April. It represents the older, less threatening London she knew, and it contrasts so sharply with the massive, ugly new foreign temple library that was planned later, symbolizing this unwelcome, rapid modernization that she would soon fight against.
And when Gerald is born, we see Peter so isolated. He's waiting alone in the uncomfortably sterile waiting room at Ilford Maternity Hospital, just sitting on a hard ledge staring at the clock.
Yeah.
This scene really underscores the intense emotional burden Peter carries so privately. He's relieved when Gerald is born, healthy, but the subsequent revelation from April, it reveals the first deep secret of their married life.
The lost twin. April doesn't tell Peter immediately. She doesn't tell anyone until she's back home recovering. She confesses to Miriam that she had twins, but the girl was stillborn.
And Miriam's reaction is so telling, isn't it? It reflects the era's just ruthless pragmatism. That's the best attitude. No point crying over spilt milk.
Wow.
She assures April that the maternity hospital would have handled the disposal, likely without a service or any fuss. And while we might hear that as incredibly callous today,
Oh, yeah.
in 1953, it was Miriam's way of demanding survival. Just compartmentalize and move forward.
But April can't compartmentalize. This is where her traumatic nature really surfaces. Her lingering guilt over the disposal of the body and the lack of a service becomes this deep internal wound. This loss is compounded later, in 1955, when a friend loses a baby, and it triggers an acute relapse of grief, where April literally sobs herself to sleep for days, convinced she had failed as a mother. This guilt feeds directly back into her lifelong fear of failure, echoing the shame she carried from her childhood.
Now imagine April dealing with that internal secret, that trauma of loss, when just months after Gerald's birth, the past literally arrives at their doorstep.
The Helly bombshell.
The Helly bombshell.
Yeah.
A pale, tall, spindly man, Reverend Timothy Helly, claiming to be her half-brother.
This wasn't just a visitor. It was an invasion. Timothy reveals he's the son of Leslie Helly's first wife, Janelle, who died of cholera. He explains that after Janelle died and Leslie remarried Maisie, he was put into an orphanage. And he found April through Mrs. First, the noxious grandmother, who was most understanding, and received £2 for the address.
That detail about Mrs. First accepting money is so critical. It shows her absolute lack of loyalty and her willingness to sell April's contact information to a stranger for profit. It just cements the toxic nature of April's family background.
The interaction itself is electric. Peter observes April's immediate, almost visceral denial and her defensive tone. She refuses to accept that her father was cruel and abandoned a son. She insists Leslie was the kindest of men. She even bans Timothy from using her forename. She is fighting so fiercely, not just for her father's reputation, but for the stability of her own carefully constructed narrative.
Of course. If her father was a kind man, then her childhood trauma was just an accident of fate, not this deep-seated legacy of familial betrayal.
Exactly. And that denial required immense emotional effort. The shock of that single evening led to April suffering more than her share of downheartedness. The source's euphemism for severe postpartum depression, or baby blues, for 6 months.
And Peter, seeing the pain, immediately cuts off the source of the disruption. He writes a furious letter to Mrs. First, ensuring she never visits and she never receives any money again. This is Peter acting as the protective anchor, severing the toxic past to protect his wife's sanity.
Okay, let's pivot to their social life, and specifically to Peter's best friend, Robert. Robert is a fellow policeman driving this flashy, loud, almost inappropriately conspicuous car for a police officer. A pillar box red Morgan 44 Sports 2-seater.
Right. Not exactly blending in.
Not at all. And April views him immediately with suspicion, calling him a danger to everybody and a manic driver.
And April's intuition proves to be sharp. The source reveals Peter discovers this massive secret in 1953. Robert does not have a license. And he has been driving that flashy sports car completely uninsured. This presents a huge moral and professional crisis for Peter, the controlled sergeant who values the law above all else, forced to cover for his best friend who is flagrantly breaking it.
This is where Peter's role as the crisis manager really shines, even if it involves some complicity. He forces Robert to apply for a license immediately. But to ensure April's silence, because April is the one who recognized the recklessness, Peter implements a bribe.
The television.
He buys April a television, delivered by rediffusion. Its transaction built on necessary silence. The TV is ostensibly company for April when Peter works nights to ease her loneliness.
But its primary function is protection. Protecting Peter's best friend, protecting Peter's professional integrity, and protecting the fragile normalcy of their social circle. The TV symbolizes the price of silence in their marriage.
The other essential figure is Judy, of course, April's first Barkingside friend. April notices Judy's intense, focused attention on Gerald and eventually learns the painful secret that Judy can't have children.
And the topic is just avoided, which is so typical of the time, but it forges this powerful, silent bond between the two women. April is carrying the secret burden of her lost twin daughter. Judy is carrying the burden of involuntary childlessness. This shared, unspoken vulnerability strengthens their friendship immensely. It's built on deep sympathy rather than just surface-level chatter.
And this complex social life continues in 1955 with the introduction of Mrs. Binney, an intellectual war widow. April connects with her deeply. She feels intellectually outmatched, but also needed. Mrs. Binney is candid about her husband's death just before VE Day and her subsequent emotional breakdown, which April found deeply relatable.
So April, trying to prove her domestic competence and solidify this new friendship, invites the Binneys, along with Judy and David, over for Saturday dinner.
And is a domestic disaster from the get-go.
A total disaster. David leaves early with an abdominal issue. April's oven fails completely, forcing her to abandon her planned meal and rush out to buy fish and chips.
But the real shock isn't the burnt food. It's the revelation that comes mid-meal. Mrs. Binney drops her cutlery and collapses into this pitiful and disturbing sobbing, and she reveals that her two sons, Patrick and Graham, are selectively mute.
Wow.
They have never spoken coherently. They're like robots, she says, and are social pariahs.
And April is just stunned into silence. She realizes she never noticed because the boys were so incredibly well behaved, they obeyed instructions perfectly. This incident creates a profound sense of failure in April.
A failure to perceive.
A failure to perceive abnormality right under her nose. If she missed something this massive and painful, how could she trust her judgment about raising Gerald? It just reinforces her fear that her carefully constructed world is inherently unstable and she is incapable of spotting the cracks.
That mounting pressure,
Yeah.
that constant threat of hidden reality, it really starts to erode April's control. And we see this manifest so violently in 1955 with the Butcher outburst.
This is a full-scale emotional breakdown, and it's fueled by alcohol. April, still reeling from the Binney revelation and her lingering grief over the twin, gets into a massive public shouting match with Mr. Atherstone at the butcher shop.
Over a turkey.
Over a turkey. She comes home sloshed on rum, shouting and raving.
And when Peter arrives home, he finds April collapsed on the floor, skirt riding up, clutching a half-empty bottle of rum. And it's Judy, once again, who steps in as the crisis manager.
Right.
She's already bathed Gerald, helped undress April, and is waiting to explain this deeply humiliating scene to Peter. This outburst just reveals April's deep, volatile capacity for chaos, the inverse of the control she strives for.
It also gives us a rare glimpse into Peter's reaction. The source suggests April's volatility actually mirrors Peter's own hidden capacity for hot-headedness, which he usually keeps ruthlessly suppressed for his career. Seeing April this way must have been terrifyingly familiar and, at the same time, deeply shameful for the controlled policeman.
In a search for stability and connection, Peter and April take a rare day out to London in 1955. They visit St. Paul's Cathedral. And Peter is dismayed by the new architecture, these bland, concrete replacement buildings around St. Paul's churchyard. He sees it as a cheap spoiling of the grand old buildings.
He admires the resilience of the cathedral itself.
Exactly. And the trip offers a subtle insight into his character. April climbs the stone gallery, ascending to the high, windy platform. Peter stays below, visibly uncomfortable. April recognizes his fear of heights, but, maintaining the air's unspoken rules, she avoids addressing it directly.
And Peter's fear of physical height it's a psychological reflection of his intense fear of losing control, of rising above his stable foundation. April, conversely, needs to climb. She needs to rise above the emotional mess she constantly finds herself in.
Meanwhile, the outside world keeps imposing itself. April expresses increasing concern about societal decline. She sees the manners of young people, the ton-up boys on motorbikes, mimicking the dangerous look of Marlon Brando, as deplorable.
And Peter, dealing with the realities of policing, he confirms her fear. He discusses the rise in serious crime. Knives and knuckle dusters are becoming routine in Ilford. Their safe, controlled suburban world is being rapidly engulfed by violence.
And then, in 1957, their close social circle is just ripped apart. Judy's husband, David, dies in a motorcycle accident. He wasn't wearing a helmet, a tragic detail that really underscores the era's lack of safety consciousness. And he died of head injuries after a lorry pulled out unexpectedly.
During her deepest grief, Judy relies entirely on April. And over tea, she confesses her unbelievable backstory, one of the most jarring details in the entire series. Her parents were extremely strict and religious. After Judy married David, her parents moved into their new house, and her mother physically slept between Judy and David in the marital bed for 6 months to prevent sex, believing the Bible ruled all aspects of domestic life.
6 months. That is a shocking portrait of religious oppression and emotional abuse. That sustained denial of intimacy and ownership of their own marital life must have been agonizing.
The climax, as Judy relates it, is explosively aggressive. David finally snaps, goes to the Checkers pub, gets thoroughly drunk, storms upstairs, and screams at Judy's mother.
And threatens what?
He threatens to fuck the arse off April if they stayed.
Wait, he uses April's name. That specific, violent threat, using another woman's name in such an aggressive sexual context, it shows David at the absolute end of his emotional rope.
Oh, completely. He was using the most shocking language possible to break the religious and social barriers, and it worked. He successfully forced the parents out that very night. It was an act of desperate love and sheer drunken rage.
But it worked. David's death, though, leaves Judy shattered and looking for a new anchor, and her interest immediately turns to Robert, Peter's best friend.
Right. She notices his constant charismatic flirting and his happy-go-lucky persona, seeing him as this perfect, energetic potential husband.
Which forces Peter into an impossible position. He's been protecting Robert's secret for years, a secret that could end Robert's career and potentially land him in prison.
Yeah.
Now, To protect Judy from marrying a man who could never truly love her, Peter must betray his friend's confidence.
So Peter is forced to reveal Robert's carefully guarded secret. He's not attracted to women. The context strongly implies homosexuality, which was, a capital crime in that era.
Yeah.
And especially devastating for a police officer.
Judy is genuinely shocked, and the source notes her old religious upbringing coming out there in her immediate reaction. The news is just incomprehensible to her.
The confrontation comes later during a disastrous dinner. Robert, backed into a corner, confesses that his overblown, charismatic, and often manic flirting is merely a defense mechanism. He admits to feeling damned frightened of being exposed as different and losing his job. He reveals the immense, soul-crushing mental strain of attempting to present as one of the normal people every single day.
And this is perhaps the most profound tragedy of this segment. Robert's decision is solidified by the confrontation and the escalating muscular dystrophy of his mother. He announces his plan to sell his house, transfer to a police station in Bayswater near his aunt, and seek a more accepting area of London, a place where he knows he risks bloody illegal places and police repercussions just to find some semblance of community and authenticity.
So Peter loses his closest friend, and another pillar of the Baxters' social stability collapses, all due to an unbearable secret.
The Barkingside era, which began with their passionate honeymoon return, is officially coming to a crashing halt, both physically and symbolically. The environment around number 8 White Road becomes absolutely traumatizing for April and Peter.
April receives her redundancy notice. The tiny, dilapidated library, the one she loved, is closing for demolition, and the books are going into storage. The replacement library, which April hates, is being built across Donkey Field, huge, round, and ugly. A foreign temple of modern architecture that she views as completely out of place and deeply distrustful.
She sees this new structure as a symbol of the modernity that is corrupting their safe, familiar world. And the construction itself, it just creates a living hell. Loud construction noise, constant fumes, dirt, earthworks, the endless grinding of machinery dominating the street. It just makes life unbearable.
And the final straw is early one Saturday morning when the chaos becomes physical. A crane driver's momentary lack of concentration results in Peter's car being utterly smashed.
And Peter, the man who controls his environment, whose only real luxury is his vehicle, has now seen his physical safety and property violated by the unstoppable march of modernity and incompetence.
So Peter uses this dual catalyst, the chaos and April's redundancy, to finally convince her to execute the promise they made on their honeymoon.
They're moving to Eastbourne.
Exactly. The sales pitch is simple. Escape the fumes, gain a mortgage-free house, and provide Gerald with a better, safer, cleaner upbringing by the sea.
And April is reluctant. She admits she misses their family in Barkingside and Stratford, that emotional web that sustained her, but she agrees for Gerald's sake, recognizing that the environment has just become toxic. The move symbolizes a fundamental search for order, a desperate attempt to reset the clock to the idyllic, bomb-scarred honeymoon of 1946.
Once they're settled in Eastbourne, Peter, ever the social connector, immediately makes friends with a fellow policeman, Andrew. And April meets Andrew's wife, Susan. For a brief moment, things seem stable again.
Until April witnesses a shocking display of public rage.
April witnesses Susan's sudden public explosion at a market vendor over a chipped cup. The rage is instant and terrifying. Swearing loudly, kicking boxes, Susan turns red and purple in the face. It's uncontrolled public chaos.
And it visibly terrifies April, but it also forces her to confront her own suppressed volatility, the memory of the butcher shop incident. So Peter, seeing April's distress, steps in and gets the painful confession from Andrew. And the diagnosis is shocking. Susan suffered brain damage after a hit-and-run bicycle accident 3 years prior, causing these uncontrollable fits of rage.
Oh.
Andrew explains the condition, noting it rhymes with coma. She manages it with pills, but Andrew is obviously struggling to cope with his wife's unpredictable behavior.
And this diagnosis allows April to approach Susan with profound empathy rather than judgment. She overcomes her fear and visits Susan. And Susan is surprisingly frank. She apologizes, but also explains her motivation for the outburst. She went without her pills on purpose that morning because she wanted her mind sharp to confront the costermonger. She admitted the drugs dull everything. Her mind, her emotions, her personality.
What a remarkable insight. Susan chose lucidity and confrontation over dull medicated safety. This confession, rooted in shared vulnerability and the burden of suppressing intense emotion, surprisingly sparks a new, deep friendship between April and Susan.
Right. They both understand the cost of attempting to maintain a facade of calm when your internal life is pure chaos.
While April is adjusting to this new, complicated social landscape in Eastbourne, she takes a trip back to Barkingside to visit Judy, and she notices Judy's remarkable physical transformation.
Right. An elfin-cut hairstyle, stylish high heels, lightness of spirit.
Judy has moved on, decisively. She reveals she's moving to Germany in 6 weeks to marry Martin, a handsome man in uniform who is completely aware of her inability to have children and accepts it without question. Judy's house is already sold. It's a clean break.
A completely clean break from the religious repression and tragedy of her Barkingside life. And as a bittersweet parting gesture, Judy offers Peter a gift related to her lost husband, David.
The motorcycle.
The motorcycle. She had David's Triumph Speed twin motorcycle beautifully restored. Not wanting to sell part of him to a stranger, she offers it to Peter for free, believing it would be the perfect home for David's memories since Peter was his best man.
And April is immediately nervous. She remembers the argument they had long ago when Peter first wanted a motorbike, and her fear of the danger, especially given how David died. But seeing Judy's relief and the immense kindness of the gesture, April reluctantly agrees to speak to Peter about accepting the gift.
This closes the chapter on their Barkingside relationships and brings a new, potentially dangerous object into their Eastbourne home.
By the 1960s, Peter and April are firmly settled in Eastbourne, but the world is changing faster than they can stabilize. Peter's career advances significantly. He passes his sergeant's exam in 1961, which puts him in a position of greater authority, but also greater danger.
And the cultural friction that April worried about in Ilford is now right on their doorstep in Eastbourne. Peter is increasingly dealing with the violent reality of the 1960s youth culture, specifically the mods versus rockers clashes that erupted in coastal towns like theirs and nearby Brighton in 1964.
This wasn't just petty vandalism. These were violent, highly publicized mass disturbances. Peter receives a black eye while attempting to contain a riot. It's a physical manifestation of the breakdown of order and the increasing risk of his job. The anchor is now routinely battered by the tides of cultural change.
April's spirits, which started high, begin this slow, painful decline. She takes a job at a local off-license, which she holds for 3 years, and it provides her with some small autonomy. But that job ends abruptly after it is held up at gunpoint.
And having been traumatized by violence in her youth, and now living with the knowledge of Peter's increasing physical danger, this is April's final physical breaking point with external violence.
So with Peter out risking his life and April emotionally withdrawing, she attempts to find worth in community engagement. She focuses on church work at Ceylon Place Baptist Church, and the church itself still bears the quiet scars of the war, adding to April's sense of timeless stability.
The source gives us one particularly memorable anecdote that illustrates April's desperate need to contribute and Peter's unintentional cruelty. April participates in cleaning hundreds of filthy pigeons and their droppings out of the church tower attic. She dons thick gloves, goggles, and oversized dungarees left over from the ARP, the air raid precautions uniforms, relics from the war itself. It highlights just how old and community-focused this church still was.
And when Peter arrives home and sees her covered in dust and grime and pigeon excrement, he laughs, loudly and uncontrollably. And April is deeply offended. She feels ridicule at the very moment she was trying to contribute to her new community and find a sense of cleanliness and purpose. That laughter, however unintentional, just punctures her fragile sense of self-worth.
By 1969, a decade after they moved, the facade of coastal contentment is cracking wide open. April finally breaks down and confesses to Peter the profound sense of loss that has dogged her. She wishes they could uproot it and plonk it down in the middle of Stratford.
Right.
She admits she misses their family, Miriam and Roy, and the emotional infrastructure of the East End.
And while she immediately tries to backtrack, insisting she's happy for Gerald's sake, Peter sees through the defensive language. The idyllic sanctuary of Eastbourne, based on a honeymoon promise, has failed to sustain April's emotional needs. She chose geographical stability over familial connection, and the silence has taken its toll.
And as if to underline that the past never truly leaves, the Reverend Timothy Helly, April's half-brother, resurfaces. He sends an unwanted Christmas card in 1968, addressed only to Mrs. Baxter and signed as her half-brother. It's a calculated act of harassment, a deliberate insertion of himself into her married identity.
And Peter, the controlled sergeant, he sees this as a profound imposition. His instinct is to control the threat. He offers to travel up to have it out with Timothy, physically if necessary.
But April, fearing a physical confrontation that could endanger Peter's career and expose their secrets, suggests writing to his bishop or simply ignoring it.
But what's fascinating here is the power dynamic. Peter ultimately leaves the decision entirely to April, reinforcing that she was the one who enforced the denial of contact in the first place, thus placing the entire burden of managing the emotional threat squarely back on her shoulders.
The denial must be actively maintained by April, compounding her anxiety.
And this brings us to the profound climax of the story. Late August 1970. All the stress, all the silence, all the denial culminates in April requiring surgery at Eastbourne District General Hospital.
The source begins the scene with Peter's paralyzing anxiety in his car outside the hospital. He is physically frozen, describing the situation as overwhelmingly terrible in its potential.
Yeah.
Peter, the controlled, emotionless sergeant, is experiencing a panic attack, feeling melodramatic and affected, something he hasn't allowed since his teenage years.
He lied to Gerald. He told him to go to work because he was genuinely afraid of his son seeing his father in such a distressing, emotional, and vulnerable state. The anchor cannot allow himself to break. He forces himself inside.
He finds April first on the list, denied food or drink. And they use frivolous talks, Peter promising to defrost the fridge, clean the house, talking about pies and chips, as a flimsy but necessary shield to avoid the unspeakable silence of what they both knew was a life-or-death moment.
And Peter observes that April has never looked so brave, masking her profound fear.
Then comes the moment of quiet farewell. April pulls away her hand, twisting off her engagement and wedding rings, the physical symbols of their stability and their marriage pact. She presses them into Peter's palm, asking him to put them somewhere safe and give them back. Tomorrow, okay?
And Peter, unable to speak, carefully places the rings in his wallet. But as the relaxing injection from the nurse begins to take effect, April grips his hand and forces him to make the ultimate promise, looking him straight in the eye, seizing her last moment of lucidity.
Tell Gerald that I love him, in case I don't make it.
This single, desperate promise, it just crystallizes her entire life's journey. Her final fear is not for herself, but the fear of absence. The fear that Gerald will feel the same sudden, abandoned loss she felt as a 9-year-old child.
And Peter, his jaw clenched, manages the promise. She's wheeled away, feeling comfort only from the memory of Peter's reliability, which had been comforting her since he fixed her cooker decades earlier in Manor Park.
Peter endures the agonizing wait in the sterile waiting room, deliberately refusing to think, maintaining the final act of control by focusing only on the clock. The relief only comes when the nurse tells him the surgery all went very well.
He visits April in recovery. She's unconscious, but later stirs. In a deeply tender, symbolic moment, Peter takes the rings from his wallet and slides them back onto her finger, physically restoring the integrity of their marriage.
And she manages a nod and a loose smile, and Peter finally allows himself the profound relief of survival.
We have tracked Peter and April from that idyllic yet bomb-scarred Eastbourne honeymoon in 1946 through to the existential crisis of 1970. And the sheer volume of grief, secrets, and unrelenting change they navigated is just astonishing.
It really is.
The secret of the lost twin, the Helly bombshell, Robert's hidden identity, Judy's unbelievable sexual repression, Susan's brain injury, and the massive cultural shift from rationing to the mods versus rockers conflicts.
Their story is a powerful portrait of what it meant to build a life in post-war England, and really the price of that stability. April, due to her intensely sensitive nature and the early pervasive trauma she endured under Mrs. First, was acutely vulnerable. Every external vulnerability, the lost twin, the Helly brother, the mutism of the Binney boys, was a mirror reflecting her own deep-seated fear of instability and filth.
And Peter was the steady, controlled anchor. The controlled sergeant, constantly managing every crisis, often by hiding secrets like Robert's identity, Susan's diagnosis, and Timothy's correspondence, to ensure their stability was maintained. He successfully managed the external chaos, but that management came at a significant internal cost.
Indeed. What stands out in Peter and April's long journey is that their applauded resilience, their ability to keep going, to present as normal, was built predominantly upon silence and active denial.
Right.
Denial of the twin, denial of the horror April suffered as a child, denial of Robert's truth, and a deliberate refusal to acknowledge Timothy Helly's existence. These were massive, powerful, and carefully guarded silences.
So as you reflect on this deep dive into the emotional architecture of Peter and April Baxter, here is the provocative thought we want to leave you with. If a marriage is built on such profound, necessary secrets, And if the goal is absolute control and denial of pain, how sustainable is that foundation? And what exact emotional toll did that constant suppression and silencing truly take on April's spirit, leading directly into the physical crisis that forced Peter into that cold hospital parking lot in 1970? Something to think about. Until next time.